do.
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo, and we have a great show in store for you tonight, live here on MNN. Our guests are Ethan and Sabrina. Ethan
Heitner.
I want to make sure I got it right, so
No
thank
worries.
you. And Sabrina Jones. All right, that's simpler.
Yes.
Well, you didn't have to say my name, Paul DiRienzo. First time, that could be difficult, too.
It's hard to spell, too.
Yes, well, we won't go into that. Welcome to the show, and we're here to talk about your magazine that you both edit, or edited this issue of, which is called World War III Illustrated. Such a happy, positive title, but a wonderful magazine all the same. Here's I'm going to just give an opportunity to see some of the covers of some of the most recent issues, and we'll be showing them more and talking about them later. And we have some other. Sabrina, you have Race to Incarceration. That looks like a fascinating book. We'll talk about that. And, you guys really like to be controversial. 3 Cities Against the Wall. All right. And this is about the wall that separates Palestine from Israel, right?
More or less,
we'll talk.
yes.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that later.
Roughly.
And this is
Do you
some,
actually have
interesting things here.
No.
Fascinating book. We're going to talk about this as well. So, wow, there's a lot of visuals here. There's plenty of visuals here. We're going to go with this stuff. Welcome to the show. Sabrina, we've known each other for many years. You're on the East Village since forever, although you guys now hearken from Brooklyn.
Sadly, I'm a former East Villager. I went kicking and screaming to Brooklyn a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I was there at the beginnings of World War III, which was when I was still an art student.
Not as devastating as we thought. We're all still here, right? No,
Yeah,
the World War III, the
no.
magazine, right?
Apparently, World War III continues. It's a low-intensity conflict.
How long has World War III been publishing?
It actually first came out in 1979. It was started by Seth Tabachman and Peter Cooper back during the days of bleep, 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 Iran,
Right.
when the Iran hostage crisis was happening.
Right.
And they were
Argo.
offended by, by Americans' hostile attitudes towards countries they knew very little about. And then when I got involved, it had kind of become an anti-nuclear comic book. And I was personally recruited because I was a budding feminist artist. And in those early Reagan days, we were taken aback by attacks on women's reproductive rights. And I joined a group called Carnival Knowledge.
Carnival Knowledge?
That did interactive games and performances about reproductive rights and the threats to them.
Sure. And okay, so it harkens back 1979, Iran Contra. We don't have the first issue had dinosaurs, one representing the Soviet Union and one representing the United States battling. I think they were dinosaurs.
That may have been number 2. There was
number
a
2?
Giant Coke bottle.
I thought that was number
Earth.
2. Maybe that was number 1.
Well, we're getting our 1s and 2s
All
mixed
right.
up because I only came in on issue 3.
You came in on issue 3. What was issue 3? That was the black and white issue?
Issue 3 was a slightly impoverished issue. We had graduated from art school. We're living in the East Village, and it had a black and white cover by a local artist called Michael Broman of sort of a skeleton dancing amongst the tenements. And we were suddenly not going so much about global issues of, Reagan and national politics. We were looking at our neighborhood that had been devastated by urban renewal, white flight, arson, drug dealing. So we were looking at this kind of skeletal neighborhood that we youngsters were trying to make our home in.
Before the squatting movement really took off.
Before squatting, before gentrification.
Right. So the most recent issue is number 44. This is the most recent issue, correct?
Yes.
All right, Ethan, tell me, you're the editor of this issue, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you guys are talking about Iran-Contra because that cover artist, it's actually a pair of artists, Icy and Sot. That photo is a piece of street art that they put up. They're Iranian street artists, and that's on the streets of Tabriz, which is a city in Iran.
Wow, that's an amazing picture because what it shows is actually this is a wall, and this is a drawing on the wall, and this is all real, and this is a photograph of it, but it looks so realistic.
No, it's a sort of half-destroyed building. They put up their art all over the streets of Tabriz and inside buildings.
What does this represent? Well, the idea of Legos in all this. It seems war-torn, but it's not really a war going on, but something like that.
Well, I mean, we do have sanctions going on against Iran, and we do have a sort of low-intensity war, perhaps.
Sure.
I wouldn't want to put words in Icy and Sot's mouth. A lot of their art seemed to me to sort of just speak to trying to show the face of humanity, in the midst of all this, and trying to sort of bring some, like a lot of their work is very playful, and I think it's kind of, what struck me was the use of the Lego blocks in the midst of this sort of like war-torn rubble situation, like this boy is about to rebuild his home with the Lego blocks.
I think it may be our best cover ever.
It's an amazing cover, great photograph.
It looks like he's going to fix that hole.
Well, let's look at the table of contents, because we have 3 issues here we're looking at. So let's see, we have anyone in particular. Here's Kemba Smith. That's an interesting one, page 27. She was somebody who was convicted under the Rockefeller drug laws and received, as it says here, she expected to get a 24-month sentence, and she got 24 years and 7 months.
And she was barely 24 years old. Now, this is, technically it wasn't a Rockefeller law because it was not a New York State law, but it was one of the federal laws that were inspired by Rockefeller. We gave birth to the war on drugs here in New York and mandatory sentencing laws, and were copied around the country and by the federal laws.
So so basically you tell the story using the cartoon method,
this story is an excerpt from the Race to Incarcerate book, the adaptation that I've done that'll be coming out in April, very soon. But it's previewed in World War III. And I illustrate it. The book is it's by Mark Maurer, and it gives you a whole history of how mass incarceration has developed in this country, so that we have the largest prison population per capita of any country, anywhere, anytime. Right,
and you have a graph in there that's pretty amazing, beautifully done graph.
We do, but the story
that shows the different countries.
In World War III is very much about, it's something I chose to emphasize because it's a personal story of one individual, and it shows how somebody's fate can be affected by these laws and a lot of the flaws in them. Kemba was not not only was she not a drug dealer, but she didn't take drugs. She was the girlfriend of a drug dealer.
That was enough.
So some of the things that you might do as a girlfriend, like driving someone somewhere or receiving a gift, would be conspiracy and money laundering. So when her drug dealer, abusive boyfriend wound up being killed and the FBI was on her trail, they pinned the charges on Kemba. And she did accept some responsibility and turned herself in, assuming that she had some role, but not expecting to get the full sentence, which is legal, which is what you get under mandatory sentencing laws, that anybody involved in the crime can do the time for the entire amount of drugs, regardless of how peripheral their involvement is.
We know that, and the prisons are full of people who doing outrageously long sentences.
Well, she'd still be there today if she hadn't been pardoned by Bill Clinton on the eve of his leaving the White House.
How long did she stay in prison?
Almost 7 years.
Wow. Now, Ethan Heitner, which is your? Do you have one in here?
I didn't actually illustrate anything in this most recent issue. We had so much good content and a sort of limited amount of space.
What does the editor do of World War III Illustrated?
Well, so what we did for this issue is we sort of put out the call for pieces. We selected a theme. We had 2 pieces that we started with this issue. One of which is this is Barak Rima's art. He's a Lebanese artist, and we had a comic that he had done. We had a longer story that he had done about sort of being a Lebanese man in Europe and being an immigrant and sort of perceptions of Europe from Lebanon and what the realities of Europe were for an Arab immigrant and facing sort of discrimination there and sort of a very surreal dream sequence. And then we had another story from another World War III contributor that we knew we wanted to publish, Sandy Jimenez's story. And then Hillary and I, the other editor, really wanted to publish these 2 stories. And so then we said, what do they have in common? What theme can we build out of them? And how can we solicit other pieces? So the theme that we chose the theme that we saw was being the other, stories of how identity others us, how we interact with identity, how we have conversations with the other. So we have a little quote in here from the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. To approach the other in conversation is to welcome his expression, the relation with the other, or conversation brings me more than I contain. If one could possess, grasp, and know the other, it would not be the other. So then we started from that sort of kernel of an idea, we started trying to find stories that would fit that theme, and we solicited some, and some we already knew were out there. And for us, it was a chance actually to go, I think, a little bit in a different direction from the usual World War III, or what people perceive perhaps as the usual World War III stories, which are contained usually about sort of much more explicit confrontational politics. And we were really looking for more personal stories, which is why Kemba's story was really, like a great fit for our magazine. As soon as we saw that, we were like, yes, that's exactly what we want for this issue.
Where do people find a World War III? Where can they get it? Or how do they find it?
You can definitely order it online. If you go to our distributor Top Shelf, which is our comics distributor, they have copies that you can order online. Or if you live in Manhattan, you can go to Blue Stockings on the Lower East Side.
Oh, Blue Stockings.
Or St. Mark's Books, if you want to support independent bookstores.
We sure do.
Yeah.
You can usually find it at Printed Matter in Chelsea, the artist bookstore.
Okay. How about in Brooklyn?
In Brooklyn, I mean, definitely Bergen Street Comics would have it, or Desert Island Comics, probably Greenlight Books, again, all great independent bookstores.
Do you have a website?
We do, worldwar3illustrated.org, and we're also on Facebook at facebook.com.
Is 3 the number, or?
Yes, World War, the number 3.
That's an Arabic numeral 3.
3, right, this one here, and this is actually in our, this is the issue 42. We were just looking at 44. Now, this is fascinating because I just want to show this incredible illustration. It covers both the front, and I want to just move my fingers out of the way so people can really see it and get a good view of it. What is this all about?
So we, the editors, I was an editor for that issue, and Seth Tabachman and Jordan Worley and I were sitting together. And the first meeting, the process is, we usually come together and we say, we want to put together an issue. We need to have a meeting to discuss the theme. And the night that we were having that meeting was I believe, maybe it was not that night, but it was the week that Hosni Mubarak was stepping down from power in Egypt. So we just had, 18 days of this amazing Egyptian revolution. Ben Ali had already stepped down in Tunisia. And I basically came to that meeting and I said, guys, this is what our issue has to be about. It has to be about this amazing wave of revolution that's going on in the Arab world. I had lived in Egypt for a while. I had some contacts with Arab cartoonists. And I said, we can get a bunch of them. And so we really wanted, so we solicited this cover from an amazing Egyptian cartoonist.
So this is an Egyptian cartoonist did this cover. Wow, it's a beautiful cover. And what does it mean? What's happening from the Mideast to the Midwest? What is that all about?
So also during, as you may recall, this was February of 2011. So the other thing that was happening right at the time we were starting to put together the issue was the massive protests in Wisconsin.
In Madison, my old hometown.
And we actually, there was some really amazing stories. Some of the stories in there actually cover.
Here's a beautiful, I love this inside, let me show it, the inside right here is right within the city, the state capitol building in Madison, Wisconsin, where thousands of people literally took over the state capitol and refused to leave for, I don't know, days or weeks or something.
And can I actually show another illustration from that really illustrated the whole theme there, from the Mideast to the Midwest. Sue Szyminski, who did that internal cover, also did this great piece where she showed one of the most inspiring stories from that Wisconsin uprising was that people in Tahrir Square in Cairo, there was a pizza store that was sending free pizzas to the occupiers in Madison, Wisconsin. And people were calling from anywhere around the world. You could call in and order a pizza and send it to the guys who were occupying the State House in Wisconsin. And so people were actually calling in from Tahrir Square in Egypt to mail pizzas, to order pizzas for the guys in Wisconsin. And this was such an amazing and beautiful illustration of solidarity that we were like this.
And they used to bring those pizzas to Zuccotti Park.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
stacks of them, right? They fed thousands of people with pizzas. It was wonderful.
What a concrete illustration of solidarity and how we're all connected.
Right.
I must say, since Ethan has been involved as an editor on World War III, it's really increased our focus on the Middle East because of his experience there.
Yes, and I can see that. So that's a new development. Well, you started in the Middle East, right? You started with, I don't know if Iran is the Middle East. I don't. Okay, I call it Western Asia these days. I try and use a new term, Western Asia. I don't know if it really matters, but whatever you call it, it's great, and it seems to be full circle. You're coming back to this region.
I think one of the things that's really exciting is that, I think, it used to be that we had to sort of talk, and even when I read early issues of World War III, which I sort of grew up with, but it wasn't, like I was a kid, I was actually born after World War III got started. But we could sort of talk about these issues and how they related us here. But one of the things that's really exciting now that's possible because of things like Facebook and email and things like that, is that we can actually get people, artists in the Middle East, to tell their own stories in their own words, and that's something that I've been really pushing hard for. Is that you know, we can get artists in Egypt to tell us about what's happening in Egypt. We can get artists from Palestine and from Iran and from all these places.
Well, let's look at here. This is the middle, in between the last two issues, 42 and 44 is 43. Okay, here. Oh my God. I'm warning people. Hide your eyes if you're easily. All right. Okay. What is this supposed to be?
That's from an Egyptian artist named Ganzir. And so this was in between 2011 and the present. There's been, you know, after Mubarak stepped down, there was still a lot of, you know, the revolution wasn't over. It wasn't so easy, and so there was still a lot of back and forth and conflict.
Right.
So I think he made that issue sort of as a, or he made that image as sort of part of that.
Right, that the conflict is continuing.
Right.
Oh my gosh, that's the bag. Now, on the front cover, you have Bradley Manning, who we've talked about on this show quite a bit.
And a beautiful painting by Sue Ko.
Yeah. It's good to see that Sue's still doing stuff for you, and she's done some other ones for
every
you as
now
well.
And then.
Yeah, she does, and famous. And this is beautiful, Bradley Manning holding the dove of peace and being targeted by a sniper rifle. So, pretty interesting. So I like that just for those covers. Beautiful. And you can always, you never know what you're going to find when you look inside this magazine, what beautiful photographs or stories or here's a full color. Do you always have a full color insert like this?
No,
or
it
this
really,
is unusual?
really depends on how much money we have in the bank at any point. You know, in the most recent issue, we don't have any color interiors just because it costs so much more money to print in color.
Right, and here's...
So if people buy more magazines, then we can print in color.
Right, and here's Bloombergs Army, the whole thing. This is, of course,
the eviction from Zuccotti.
This is the eviction of Zuccotti and the Occupy Wall Street movement. Well established here. This is beautiful by Seth, right? This is Seth's work. I can tell
that's
that.
right.
Yeah, beautiful. And Seth Bachman, who is a great artist who did some of this work. And folks can see that. So, wow, is World War III part of Occupy? Is it a committee of Occupy or anything like that? Or
we predate and we continue. We certainly were friendly to Occupy.
Right.
We all went down there.
We were all friendly. We all spent a lot of time there.
And we made posters, and some of us made comics about it. But no, we one thing about World War III is that it just kind of keeps going. Many publications and projects come up and go away.
Does art, is art a weapon in the revolution, or is it something that tells the story of the revolution? In other words, can art actually change the world, or does it just tell us about the world being changed?
I think it can do both. I mean, there's definitely a kind of comics that are simply for us to digest our history and understand what is going on.
Yeah.
But depending on how you do it and where you do it, they can also be tools. Not necessarily in this format, but other things we've done. Like some of us have done work for The Real Cost of Prisons, which produce very short little comics that are used in popular education around incarceration issues.
Sure.
And inspired by that, I did a very short Xeroxable strip for the counter-recruitment movement. It was called Mixed Signals, and it actually, like, each page could be Xeroxed as a separate flyer, or the whole thing could be done together.
And tells the story that...
And I gave permission to activists to make non-commercial copies of it.
Sure.
So that people who are out there tabling in the cafeterias of high schools talking to kids who are being recruited by the military will have some other graphics to approach the kids with.
Excellent. Wow. Well, let me, I'm reaching down here because we have such a richness of materials to work with. So let me reach down and bring up this book, which is the fourth book, which Seth handed to me yesterday. And this is not World War III, but he said it was very related. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what's this Three Cities Against the Wall, which is filled with art that's obviously concerned with the Middle East, with Palestinian, and with this is. I just opened it up and saw this.
It's a catalog of an exhibit that went to 3 cities. So you have Jerusalem, Ramallah, and New York.
And this one here is, of course, an airplane crashing into a minaret.
The Tower of David. That's the Tower of David in Jerusalem.
Wow, that's a radical image.
Yes.
Right. All right. So, and here's the wall. So, okay, is this? So, why did he hand me this? Is this something that we should know?
I think probably because you guys, it seems like we're talking about Middle East stuff. We're talking about the boycott movement. So I think he probably handed that to you because that's his major. Seth was really the driving force of organizing that exhibition.
I see.
And put together that book. Sabrina and I don't have any work in it.
We don't. I mean, it's very much, it's the opposite idea of boycotting. It's about getting artists from each of these three countries to work together on one exhibit that would travel between the three countries.
I would actually disagree with you that that's the opposite of boycott. Actually, the piece that I have in 43 is actually about boycott, and is an interview with an Israeli and a Palestinian artist who work together.
That's interesting. Let me boycott. Right. We're throwing this boycott thing around, which is interesting. And just to let's see what we have left here. Good. I don't want to talk too much, but the other night I had an opportunity to meet a famous musician, right? A famous progressive musician, Paul Kantner from the Jefferson Starship. I went to the show with my friend Aaron Kay, and after the show we went backstage, and he was telling us that the band had decided to play in Israel, although he was not supportive of what goes on. He's not a religious person and didn't really understand what this boycott was. So maybe you can explain it to us.
Sure. So the boycott call, the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions came out of a Palestinian civil society movement in 2005. And what it calls for is, it says, because Israel has violated international law, because international law has seemed unable right now to do anything to stop it, that time and time again there are these, the UN finds that it violated this law, it violated that resolution, nothing ever happens. It said, how can we as international civil society put pressure on Israel to obey international law, is to find inspiration in some of the time-honored techniques of the past, the movement against apartheid South Africa, the movement to end racism in the American South, by putting nonviolent mass political pressure on Israel in the form of boycott. And the way that applies to, and the reason I disagree with you about how it's not about not interacting with Israeli artists.
So you wouldn't consider that project a violation of boycott?
I think it would. I don't know enough about the details of the project, but so the way it applies to cultural workers and artists is there is a specific call for cultural workers not to participate with Israeli cultural institutions. It's not about boycotting individual Israeli artists, but not to participate in Israeli cultural institutions that are complicit with, or at the very least don't take stands against, the violation of Palestinian human rights.
I see. Like what are like?
So, for example, Roger Waters, who's the who, is a very prominent musician who's taken a very strong stand in favor of the boycott.
Absolutely. And
so he's spoken a lot about it, and he says, like, look, you can't. It's like playing Sun City in apartheid South Africa. You can't go there because when you go there and just play as a band and pretend like everything is a normal, it's just a normal, it's just a normal gig that you play, you're normalizing a situation that's not normal.
All right, great. So we only have a few more minutes, and I want to get back to World War III, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that because it is interesting, and maybe we'll do another program where we'll focus on this and maybe we'll get into a debate or something like that. Okay, good, excellent. So we're talking about World War III Illustrated, and
I'd just like to talk about one of my favorite artists who you really can only see in World War III for the most part. I mean, he may be some other places, but primarily Sandy Jimenez has been writing these fabulous stories based on his own childhood in the South Bronx, and each one will just strike to your heart. This one is about why he is not a photographer, because of the way that he felt objectified by some art students who came to photograph him and his buddies as little children in the South Bronx.
I see.
Back in the 80s, I guess.
I think I read part of that story. He also got beat up by the cops for taking pictures of some cars for his art project. His own part,
when he was in art school and attempting to take those photographs.
Right. Yeah. They said, "Who are you taking pictures of these cars?" And they smacked him around.
Exactly.
And Sandy, I actually have to really second that Sandy is one of my favorite artists in World War III, and I'm really proud to be able to publish him. I think his stories are amazing. I think they really exemplify, when people hear World War III, oh, it's a political comics magazine, they think of us, and frequently reviewers talk about us as if we have this very blunt, hit you over the head style of politics, which is, sometimes we do, and sometimes it's appropriate. And like Sabrina, I've also done plenty of work which is designed to be handed out at protests, designed to be handed out as sort of material for fueling activism. But also what politics means is sometimes stories like Sandy's, where we talk about how our everyday lives are affected by things like racism, gentrification, all these bigger capitalism.
And about how you live and how you treat people on a one-to-one basis. Yeah. It's not all about some stand you take that you vote for or you buy or you put up a sign about. It's about how you live and treat other people.
Last couple of minutes, I wanted to ask you about cartooning in general as a form of art. I mean, tell us why does it appeal to you, and how do you think it can appeal to the public as a way to communicate an idea?
Well, I like to draw. That's why I like to do it.
Okay.
I have this problem. I want to change the world, but at the same time, I want to stay home at my drawing table. So being part of radical cartooning allows me to hopefully do that at the same time. A drawing is disarming and appealing to people in a way that many other media are not. I used to be a painter, and I found merely by telling people that, they would often recoil in insecurity and start telling me they didn't know anything about art. But if you tell people you're a cartoonist, they open up, they warm up. It's a disarming media. Oh,
that's interesting. So, Ethan, how about you in the cartoon world?
I could add to that a lot of, like at the very concrete level, when you're handing out flyers to people on the street, when you're an activist, if you hand someone a comic strip, they're much more likely to take it from you and read it than if you hand them some block of text. So on the very practical level, it's a great revolutionary tool. But also,
go ahead.
It is very accessible, and it's very, it doesn't require expensive equipment. You can make a cartoon, you can make a comic strip just with some computer paper and a Sharpie, and you can Xerox it on your LaserJet or whatever you have access to. And so I think it's a very, you can tell any sort of story with it, and you can go to any place and you can draw any scene that you can imagine. But you can do it all with very simple tools that are very cheap and easy to access.
In fact, one day I went to my favorite neighborhood grocery store on Church Avenue in Brooklyn, and there was a picket line out front and a banner saying, "Don't shop here, unfair to workers." And somebody handed me a one-page comic strip, which I grabbed and said, "Who drew this? Do you know who drew this?" He drew it.
Oh, really? So it was already being used and spread around by people.
Yeah.
People can take a Xerox it, and next thing you know, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, I just want to show folks again. This is the front issue, the front cover of the issue that's on the stands now. Maybe you could tell folks again where they can find a copy of World War III Illustrated, how they can get it.
Topshelf.com.
Yeah, if you live in New York, definitely go to Blue Stockings, go to St. Mark's, go to your local independent bookstore, independent comic book store, and ask for World War III. They should have it. And if you don't live in New York, if you don't live near an independent bookstore, go online to worldwar3.org. You can see a link there to our distributor Top Shelf, or if you Google Top Shelf Comics, they have a webpage and you can order it online from them.
Great, and what's your website?
worldwar3illustrated.org.
Number 3, right?
Yes.
The Arabic number 3, right?
Yes.
Great issue. Last half minute, how do you want to, what would you like to leave people with? What's the takeaway for your magazine?
Support local, local artists, support artists who are trying to tell an independent political message. We're not part of any broader political movement. We give our artists independent freedom. We don't have a party line.
And band together and start your own comic book or art gallery or TV studio.
And this is an exhibit, an opportunity to do that. A lot of folks have these skills that can do it. All right, thank you very much for joining us, Ethan and Sabrina. It's been just wonderful, and we've had a great time. And hope to have you on again to talk about this World War III Illustrated.
Hey,
thank you so much.
Bye-bye.